Well, Fardaws Aimaq is back in the transfer portal before ever even suiting up for Texas Tech. And while the superstar forward will make a huge impact for somebody down the stretch, the big question is who?
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is up? Welcome to the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I am your host, Andy Patton, and today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, more odds, and more lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. Well, Wednesday afternoon, we heard the surprise news that Fardaws Aimaq who is battling a leg injury that has kept him out of action for the entire season. He is now officially entering the transfer portal. It sounds like, at least as of this conversation, he is going to be eligible to suit up for a new team right away. It is the wild, wild west in college basketball these days. Emery Lida is here with me today, writer and podcaster who covers Texas Tech. Emery, before we speculate on some potential destinations for Aimaq, I really just kind of want to hear your initial thoughts to this. At least to us as more of a national audience, it definitely seemed like a sudden departure, but I don't know if there felt like there was something brewing behind the scenes with Aimaq and kind of what this might mean for the Red Raiders.
Yeah, I mean, for Aimaq, this is something that really caught a lot of people off guard. I think you look at what happened over the past couple of months. He's been on Tech's bench. He just got the cast off of his leg on Monday, and he was on the bench on Tuesday night's game against Eastern Washington. And then on Wednesday, you heard news of him entering the portal, and I think initially a lot of people were like, what's the cause of this?
Right.
And you look back, and in isolation, it doesn't make a lot of sense, but there's things that you kind of heard that led up to this about in the get-go, like starting off before the injury even happened in September. Obviously, the first couple of months with the program also coincided with the rise of Daniel Baccio, who's a big for Tech that has had a really nice start to the season. There were questions about how those two would fit together. And, you know, with bigs and foot injuries, it's something that it takes a while for them to come back from. We heard a report from Jeff Goodman that Aimaq kind of wasn't happy with how Mark Adams was supposedly trying to rush him along. You add in the fact that when he comes back, there's no guarantee that he's going to be able to get like as much of a role as I think you would see for a guy of his caliber. And there's the on-court side of that I think has a lot to do with it. And then also, you know, question about NIL deal. If he can't make it back this season, is he going to get all of his money? There's stuff there that's just behind the scenes that we don't know a lot about. So there's a lot there that could go on, but certainly it's a big blow to the team. I mean, Aimaq was kind of the prize transfer for Tech into the season. So for him to not be able to play a single game for the Red Raiders, it's a tough blow for them. I think it's a tough blow for Aimaq too, just to kind of have to reset and figure out where he's going to go going forward.
Yeah, it's such an interesting story, and I don't know how much of the details of this we'll frankly ever know, quite honestly, especially with regards to the NIL stuff. Clearly, we'll get a sense eventually of his injury status, and if January 1st is way off in terms of when he's going to be eligible, then you could maybe, or at least healthy, then you could maybe understand why some of that came together. But if he's playing in like a couple of weeks, if he's playing in mid-January, for example, like it's going to be interesting to see to maybe know or maybe never know what exactly went down here with this kind of strange tenure at Tech. But yeah, Aimaq, when he entered the portal, he was sought after by everybody, and for good reason. 19 points, 14 rebounds at Utah Valley, shot 44% from deep. That was on, only 1.5 attempts per game, but there are not a lot of guys who can do that, who can bring that level of rebounding, of offense, of outside shooting, stretching the floor. He had a lot of suitors and mini suitors who I think ended up falling out because there wasn't certainty on his playing time. I know Gonzaga, for example, brought Aimaq in. They talked to him. They had a lot of conversations, but at the time, Drew Timme hadn't committed to coming back yet, so there wasn't a guarantee of whether his playing time would look like. And now you're in a situation where it's the middle of the season. You're presumably wanting to play this year. And I guess that's part of the question I want to ask you here, Emery, is like, Do you, without knowing a lot on his injury situation, do you expect that his decision to enter the portal is about playing somewhere this year and trying to play professional basketball starting in June? Or do you think that this is maybe more about, hey, I want to transfer somewhere, get my feet under me, get a new home for the rest of this season, and then really blow it out next season? Do you have a sense or a guess on which of those two situations we're in right now with Aimaq?
It's hard to tell. I think common sense would say he's already 23 years old. Like
Right.
his professional career opportunities are going to be limited if he spends a full another year in college. I think the expectation that I had heard from the program kind of on the inside was that the January 1st was a very optimistic deadline in the first place.
Sure.
And you're probably looking at early February at the earliest for him to at least be able to play competitive basketball.
Right.
That's not suddenly going to go away with them transferring to a new location.
Right.
If anything, you're going to a new team, new medical staff, new everything. You're going to have to kind of go through some early hoops there. So I think it's a little bit ambitious for him to have any sort of major impact. I feel like he was obviously going to be eligible to return. And if he's eligible, if there's a team out there that could give him the opportunity where he's fully healthy by the middle of February and can make that sort of impact, have heavy minutes, I feel like that's something he would do. But at the same time, like, you don't want to be wasting your last year of eligibility in essentially a situation that you aren't going to be able to play to your fullest end. So as of now, I would say it's probably more likely that he transfers and thinks about next year, but certainly anything's open. We've already heard he's eligible. And at this point, like, nothing would surprise me in that sense.
Yeah, that is the interesting part of this, is like looking at some of those. Every program that was interested in him pivoted to another. They found somebody else. Every school did. Or either they chose to stick with in-house options, or they went out and added new players via the portal after Aimaq went to Tech. So for now, he's in a situation where, a lot of the programs that were interested in him, that he already has built relationships with, coaching staffs that he's already talked to during his time in the portal, may not necessarily have that same level of interest. I took a look at the 5 programs that were on his top 5 list, of course, including Texas Tech. The other 4, you have Texas, who has got other stuff they're worrying about right now, quite frankly, and also doesn't necessarily need any big-time additions. You have Iowa, which I guess is possibly a fit there. You have Gonzaga, which they have been struggling this year, but not in the front court. I don't know that there's an obvious fit there. And then you have UW, which to me is far and away the most likely fit in terms of his ability to play this year, simply because they did bring in 2 big man transfers in Braxton Mia out of Fresno State and then Frank Kepnang out of Oregon. But Kepnang is out for the year. So they already lost one of the big players that they brought in specifically to fill that role. So to me, if he's looking to play this year, that is the spot that makes the most sense. Of course, Aimaq is not limited to the 4 other schools that he had in his top 5 during the transfer portal. He can go anywhere. So there's 350 something other schools that could potentially show interest. UW is where I'm leaning if he wants to play this year. I don't know if you have any guesses or a sense of schools that may show some interest here, or if it's kind of one of those things where it's really wide open.
Yeah, I think that's where I would lean in terms of just this year. Looking at Washington, they seem like the obvious pick if you're looking at relationships he's established in the off season. But again, it's the Wild West. It's kind of rare to have, it's really rare, honestly, to have someone in the portal mid-season of this caliber. So, I mean, you don't know what programs are going to get desperate, what programs have the space on their roster to even go after a guy like Aimaq. I mean, it's going to be interesting to watch, but I mean, nothing would surprise me. But if you had to make me choose between the teams that showed any sort of interest in the offseason, I would say probably Washington.
Well, the SEC is duking it out with 3 excellent West Coast programs on Saturday, and how those teams perform will go a long way toward determining if this conference is full of pretenders or contenders. More on that, but before we get there, I want to tell you all about BetOnline. College basketball and the NBA are back in action, and college football and the NFL remain going strong into the end of the calendar year. BetOnline.net remains your number 1 source for all of your betting needs and sports information. From all the latest odds, contests, and player props, you name it, BetOnline remains the best spot for all your latest sports developments, including podcasts and reviews for all of the leagues this season. And it's not just basketball. BetOnline is your continued source for all your sports wagering information needs, including live betting and your favorite Vegas casino games. They even have lines for coaching changes across every major sport. So even in the offseason, you can get your fix. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action. BetOnline, where the game starts. All right. Well, yeah, the SEC has got themselves a trio of fantastic games on Saturday. In fact, for anybody listening to the show, including you, Lance, I hope sincerely that everybody's got a comfortable pair of pajamas to wear on Saturday, because it is an extraordinary day of college basketball games. We are going to talk in just this segment alone. We're going to talk about 3 games where all of the 6 teams playing are ranked within the top 20. And we're not even talking about Houston, Virginia, which is arguably the most exciting game happening on Saturday. My co-host Isaac Shade and Parker Ainsworth, the host of Locked On Cougs, already discussed that one earlier this week, but it is a ridiculous slate of basketball games taking place on Saturday. Lance Dahl, Locked On Kentucky, is here. We're going to start talking about, of course, the Kentucky and UCLA game. Lance, I don't know how much you saw of this, but UCLA absolutely dismantled the Maryland Terrapins earlier this week. 20 points at halftime for Maryland. UCLA only had 4 turnovers. They shot over 55% from the field, over 40% from deep. This is not exactly what UCLA has looked like all year. They obviously had a couple of losses in Portland in the Phil Knight Invitational, not in Portland. They had a couple of losses in their MTE earlier this year, but regardless, this team is rolling right now. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what Kentucky needs to do to avoid getting steamrolled here by this really good UCLA team.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you mentioned, picked up a couple back-to-back losses earlier in the year to Illinois and Baylor. Obviously, riding some momentum, like you said, after just absolutely dismantling Maryland. Not a whole lot that I caught from that game, but like you mentioned, and we were talking about this before we got on air, 20 points at halftime. So you note, by the way, that the calling card for the Bruins has been the offense. Yeah. But for them to be able to step up in that type of way against Maryland, maybe it's Maryland's inefficiencies on their own, maybe a little bit of a mix there, but really impressive what they've been able to do over the past several games since that loss to Baylor. Look, I think it's very, very simple what Kentucky needs to do in this game and what UCLA wants to kind of force Kentucky to do. I think they're going to try and make the Wildcats take some really tough shots. If you do end up actually going back and watching that Maryland game or watch some of their more impressive wins so far this season, they really hound you and they put you on the three-point line and they make you take tough, contested shots. And to be honest with you, that's something that Kentucky has struggled to do so far this season. They have some guards that we had really high expectations for heading into the season. Obviously, Antonio Reeves, CJ Frederick, we expected them to be really, really good. Reeves actually leads the team in scoring right now as a really decent three-point threat on his own. But what the Wildcats have struggled to do this season offensively is create, I think, outside of the structure that they have, create and really knock down those tough jumpers like I was discussing. So I think that's what UCLA is going to force Kentucky to try and do, and I think that's simply what they have to do, is take tough shots and make tough shots in this game. I think Oscar Tshiebwe, look, he's a known commodity. I think he's going to have his way in this game just based on what I've seen with the numbers in the individual matchups. UCLA, not particularly tall, only 170th or 160th, in average national height. Right. I think that Tshiebwe should be able to do what he wants to in this game. But outside of that, he can't be the only guy that's running the ship, right? You have to be able to get better guard play. I think Severe Wheeler, who we talked about at length actually on a recent episode of Locked On Kentucky, whether or not he should be getting as many minutes as he is because of his inefficiency shooting the basketball. I think he's going to have to step up in a big way. Across from him, Tiger Campbell, obviously a really good point guard for the Bruins for the past 25 years. He's been there for a hot minute. That's going to be an interesting matchup. But yeah, I think it's just guards creating and actually knocking down the shots they take. That is the biggest thing for me in this game.
I'm going to be really fascinated to see how this game plays out, especially like you said in the backcourt. Tshiebwe is going to have a fantastic game. I really believe that. But can Kentucky's guards keep up with the really good guard play that we've seen from the Bruins so far this year? To me, that is going to be a huge hinge. Lance, I want to pivot and move to other SEC games, other Kentucky opponents that they're going to see down the line. Again, like we said, the SEC has decided to play out west on Saturday. They got 3 games against West Coast opponents. Of course, the other one is a big matinee contest, 10 a.m. out on the West Coast between the Zags and the Alabama Crimson Tide. That game is going to be played in Birmingham, so it is not a home game for Alabama, but it is a pseudo home game. It is the return of the last time these two teams played last year at the new Climate Pledge Arena in Seattle. So it's kind of a pseudo home and home series between Mark Few and Nate Oates. Gonzaga's had kind of an odd year. 3 losses already, which is very uncharacteristic, very unusual for a Mark Few-led program. Of course, those 3 losses are to Texas, Purdue, and Baylor, losses that at the time, some of them didn't look as good as they do now. And those are three really not bad losses to have on your calendar. Of course, Gonzaga did secure a victory over Kentucky, as well as Michigan State, as well as Xavier. But this Alabama team has done something that hasn't been done in over 50 years, Lance. That is, they defeated two number one ranked teams in the same season before January. The last time that happened, 1965, by the Duke Blue Devils. This is a remarkable season so far for Alabama. Of course, that 4 overtime win over North Carolina and the victory over Houston. For me, this game's going to come down to how the Zags can defend freshman Brandon Miller. He's been absolutely incredible for Alabama this year. I'm curious kind of your thoughts on this game and what's going to be a really fun one on Saturday morning.
Yeah, before I dive into that, I just want to point out, you talk about all these teams handing each other losses. Isn't it weird how Baylor has just kind of gotten lost in the shuffle after beating UCLA and Gonzaga? I mean, they caught losses against Marquette and Virginia. I remember watching that Marquette game and going, what the heck is going on? But like, even you mentioned for Gonzaga, 3 losses so far this season. I mean, early in these non-conference games that are really, really significant, teams are just kind of taking body blows from just random opponents, it feels like. And Gonzaga, obviously one of them that's come out the gates struggling a little bit, I would say. Obviously the Zags, I think on defense, in the 2 losses before the Baylor game, you and I have talked about this. It was about getting back on defense.
Absolutely.
And this should be a track meet, right? Just based on what we understand about both these teams, their offensive philosophies, what Nate Oates likes to do, what Mark Few likes to do. Brandon Miller, obviously, for the Crimson Tide, a really, really solid freshman. Only shooting 39% from the floor, which is something that I noted whenever I was looking up numbers for this conversation, Andy. That's not particularly great, but I mean, when you're getting almost 19 a night out of a freshman, you're obviously going to take that. But yeah, absolutely. I think this is going to come down to just simply which team can get out and transition and score the most. Obviously, Gonzaga's had issues with that, like we mentioned a second ago. But that's really, I think that you could break down individual matchups. Obviously, Javon Quinterly is going to be important from the Crimson Tide as well. Drew Timme, what is he going to do? You know, I mentioned earlier that a player was in college for 25 years. I think Timme actually has 26, if I'm not mistaken. I'd have to go and check. But it is really going to come down to pacing, who can be more efficient in their transition offense and who can knock down more shots. I think this is going to be a really fun game, very entertaining to watch. Like you said at the beginning of this segment, Andy, you better get your pajamas, you better get your popcorn. This one's going to be entertaining for sure.
Absolutely. The Crimson Tide did a good job against Drew Timme last year, and Charles Bediako was a big part of that. If he's back, he's healthy. If he can help shut down Drew Timme, then Gonzaga's secondary scorers, namely Julian Strother, Rasir Bolton, really need to step up in a major way. They haven't really been consistent yet this year, but this is going to be one where they're both going to be, they need to be on their A game for Gonzaga to pull out a victory here. Lance, final game here of this ridiculous SEC West Coast gauntlet, just 3 games and mini that are worth watching on Saturday. That is between the Tennessee Volunteers, and the Arizona Wildcats. Let's get that correct. Tennessee 6th, Arizona 9th. Obviously another really fun matchup between 2 top 10 teams. Tennessee had that odd loss to Colorado, very kind of baffling game in the midst of a very baffling season for Colorado, quite frankly. But other than that, Tennessee has just been absolutely rolling. And the same story with Arizona. They have been fantastic. There was thought that maybe there would be a dip in this team's production after they lost 3 players to the NBA last year, and Ben Mathurin, Christian Koloko, Dallin Terry. Now, of course, they're still rolling. Tommy Lloyd's got this team in a great spot. Azuolas Tubelis looks like a dark horse player of the year candidate. Former Gonzaga center Umar Ballo followed Lloyd to Arizona. He's been fantastic as well. Curious your thoughts on what should be another really fun, really entertaining matchup on Saturday.
Obviously, this one's going to be fun, but a little bit of a stark contrast here, Andy. It's the nation's best offense against the nation's best defense in terms of adjusted efficiency. Whenever you go and look at Kim Pom. Absolutely. Tommy Lloyd knows how to run offense. This guy knows how to put points up, and it's been really fun to see the Wildcats underneath him for 2 seasons now. Tubelis, I think, is going to be one of the big matchups in this game. How does Tennessee's front court handle this guy? They've got 2 really, really solid front court players in Uros Plavšić and then obviously Olivier Comwa over there as the starter coming out the gate. So how those 2 guys defensively handle him is going to be, I think, one of the big things in this game. Obviously, Tubelis is leading the Wildcats in scoring, obviously, and I think it's going to be important to see what Arizona does outside of him. I think that's going to be really important to note. Something else, Andy, that I also wanted to point out. Tennessee really has struggled to shoot the ball this year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, obviously they're a good team. Don't get me wrong. Very talented, very athletic, got a lot of hype, all that good stuff. They're shooting about 40% from the floor as a team. And that is the fact. I'll just say this. We talk about that Colorado loss being just crazy, but for this team right now to be 9-1 and shooting 40% from the floor is impressive, especially considering the amount of really good opponents that they've played, which you actually talked about that on my podcast the other day.
Yeah.
This has been an interesting stretch here. Something I wanted to point out before we kind of wrap things up. Of Tennessee's top 6 contributors, meaning the percentage of possessions used, it's their top 6 contributors. Only 2 of them have an effective field goal percentage of 50% or higher, which is obviously not good. It's in relation to that 40% as a team. All 6 of Arizona's top 6 contributors are 50% or higher from the floor. So, I think Arizona, I think they've got some height on them, got some speed on them. I would pick Arizona in this matchup, but man, if Tennessee's defense comes out swinging, or if Arizona's just cold from the floor to start, this could be a dogfight in a way that we've not seen in quite some time for Arizona. But for Tennessee, I think this is nothing special if this does get into a little bit of a grit and grind type of game.
Well, there are still plenty more epic games taking place this weekend, and a lot of high-quality programs are going to be put on upset watch, including the undefeated UConn Huskies. Could this be the week they finally fall? Before we get there, though, a message here. You're hanging out with some friends and putting back a few drinks. A few becomes a few too many. As the evening comes to an end and people start to head out, you think of calling for a ride. Nah, you live nearby. You can make it home okay. It's no big deal. What are the odds you'll get pulled over anyway? And even so, what's the worst that could happen? Everyone knows about the risks of driving drunk. The results are often tragic and often deadly. However, that still doesn't stop everyone from getting behind the wheel under the influence. That's why police officers are out right now looking for impaired drivers on our roads to save lives. So if you think you're okay to drive after a few drinks, think again. Play it safe and plan ahead to get a ride. It only takes one mistake to change your life or someone else's forever. Drive sober or get pulled over. All right, we are doing Upset Watch here, solo Upset Watch. I got 3 teams that I'm putting on Upset Watch as we get into what I've already continued to remind you all is an outstanding slate of college basketball games taking place on Saturday. One of these is also a Sunday game as well. We're going to kick it off with the big one, what would be the biggest upset of the season, or at least one of the biggest upsets of the season. That would be number 3 UConn at the Butler Bulldogs Hinkle Fieldhouse. This game is taking place Saturday at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern time. It'll be on FS1 for folks who want to watch. Look, the main reason here, true road games are hard. True road games in conference are challenging. Hinkle Fieldhouse they're going to bring it. That place is going to be popping off. Butler has a little bit of momentum right now as well. A 4-game win streak. Not an incredibly impressive group of victories, although Kansas State is a very nice win for the Bulldogs. They beat Cal, the worst Power 5 program by a landslide, one of the worst Power 5 programs we've seen in a very long time. So don't want to give Butler too much credit for a win over Cal there. They've also beat Tennessee Tech and Yale. But this is a decent Butler squad. I think they haven't quite lived up to expectations, but obviously it's taking a lot of teams, especially teams with new coaches, a little bit more time to find their groove. I think Butler is starting to kind of lock in where they're going to be this season. They're a 37% shooting team from deep. You are at home in front of your home crowd and you can shoot the lights out of the basketball. That is a recipe to beat just about anybody. Now, UConn is not just about anybody. They are very, very good. They have not had a close game this year. They are blowing the doors off people. There is a reason that myself and co-host Isaac Shade labeled them the best team in the country on Monday's episode. And we're still feeling that, still agreeing with that, but teams can get upset. And Butler on the road, 37% shooting team. This to me is a recipe where UConn has to bring it. They have to be ready to go. So far, that has not been an issue for the Huskies this year, but any slip up, even a sloppy half, a sloppy 15 minutes of basketball is potentially enough for Butler to stay in this game for the majority of the game. And you get to the last 4 minutes, 8 to 10 point swing either direction. You're at home. You've got that advantage going for you. I could see this one being at least a very tight game for the Huskies. And if they don't execute down the stretch, you could see their undefeated season come to a close. Next game I wanted to talk about here is a game. Most of the time when we do upset watch, we're talking about two teams, one team that is ranked, one team that is unranked. However, looking at the games going on this weekend, a lot of times it's two ranked teams playing each other, hence why the slate on Saturday is so appealing. But also it's a lot of games where there's just not a likely upset. I mean, UConn Butler is probably not the most likely upset that we have ever picked here on Upset Watch. But here, I wanted to highlight teams where there is clearly a favorite, and there is a team that is clearly favored, And in this case, neither team is ranked, but that is between St. John's and Florida State. This game is taking place also on Saturday, 11:30 Pacific time, 2:30 on the East Coast. It is the Orange Bowl Classic. KenPom rankings here. KenPom has St. John's 52nd, has Florida State 138th. To me, if you are doubling up another team's spot in the KenPom rankings, I would consider that an upset. I think that is enough to be considered upset watch worthy. Again, KenPom has St. John's 72nd ranked offense, 35th ranked defense in the country. Meanwhile, Florida State 166th offensively and 120th defensively. Look, Florida State hasn't been good. This is not a secret that Florida State have not lived up to expectations. Leonard Hamilton having a pretty rough year over there in Florida. But this is not a true road game for St. John's. However, it should be a pro-Florida State crowd. I acknowledged the true road atmosphere being a challenge for UConn in this game. I believe it will be at least part of a challenge here for St. John's, although not necessarily as significant. Again, not playing on Florida State's campus necessarily. St. John's has some okay wins, but frankly, they don't have a lot of great wins. 3 of their wins are over KenPom teams that are higher ranked than Florida State. That is Nebraska, who is currently 80th, Syracuse, 1 spot below them at 81st, and then DePaul at 106th. St. John's only loss is to an Iowa State team, a good Iowa State team. So by all accounts, St. John's has looked like a solid quality team. Florida State, despite not having a good record at all, they have also been very close in a couple of the games they have played against really good opponents. They only lost by 5 points to Virginia, one of the best teams in the entire country, and they only lost by 10 points to Purdue, also one of the best teams in the entire country. You know, almost only doesn't count except what horseshoes and hand grenades, as the old phrase goes. But for Florida State to be that close, to be competitive against really good opponents, for St. John's to be in a position where they haven't really beat any good opponents yet. They've beat some okay opponents, but I think there's a strong argument. In fact, it's almost a guarantee, quite frankly, that I don't think St. John's has beat an NCAA tournament team. Nebraska, Syracuse, DePaul do not strike me as NCAA tournament teams. Perhaps one of the other mid-major programs they defeated will end up getting an automatic qualifier, but St. John's hasn't proven it to me yet. Florida State has been in some close games. They're going to have the home crowd on their side. Neither team is a very good shooting team. They both shoot under 33% from deep. St. John's is a much better rebounding team, and if they win the battle on the boards, they're probably going to secure a victory here. But I think that there is enough here to potentially consider this an upset if Florida State is able to pull this one off. Finally, and I know we feel like we've been picking on this team a little bit, hopefully our fearless leader and the college channel manager, Zach Blackerby, doesn't get too frustrated with us. But yeah, I'm going to put Auburn back on upset watch here. We had them on upset watch against Memphis. That game did end up becoming a victory for Penny Hardaway's Memphis program. Now Auburn ranked 19th in the country. On Sunday, they will take on USC, Andy Enfield's Trojans. This game again Sunday at 2:30 Pacific time, 5:30 on the East Coast. It'll be on ESPN. There have been a lot of close calls for Auburn this year. Obviously, we had the loss to Memphis. We discussed that one already. They have a 43-42 win over Northwestern. They have a 5-point victory over the Billikens of St. Louis. And then recently, just an 8-point victory over Georgia State. So we have just seen a team that has kind of coasted, secured some narrow victories over teams that they should be beating by more than 1 or 2 points, quite honestly. Right now, they're going to take on a USC team that is not great. To be perfectly honest, USC is 72nd in KenPom. They're a borderline, kind of on the cusp of being a team you'd consider for an at-large bid. A win over Auburn does a lot for USC's hopes of getting an at-large bid. So they're motivated. They're very, very motivated to pull off a victory here. And it's at home for USC. Home game for the Trojans. Auburn's flying all the way out to Southern California, going to take on a motivated talented USC team coming off of a couple lackluster performances. You can see kind of how the narrative could be created here, where this might not be a good victory for the Tigers. Neither team is particularly great offensively. USC has a top 60 defense in the country, but they are a average to below average offensive team. Both teams shoot under 33% from deep. Auburn only shoots 28% from deep. But again, Auburn has a top 10 defense. So we were saying USC's defense is 60th. Auburn's is top 10. So you take two middling offenses against each other, you probably want to lean with the team with the better defense. So that's some optimism for Auburn, and certainly not doom and gloom. The game is far from over at this point as we're recording this on Thursday afternoon. But I do think that there's a pretty easy recipe, or at least a plainly visible recipe for USC to secure a home victory, a potential at-large, maybe not securing, it's way too early to secure an at-large bid, but the kind of win that really helps cement your resume when you're looking for an at-large bid in what should be a decent, not great, but decent Pac-12 conference play. All right, that is going to do it for us today and for this week. Enjoy the epic slate of games on Saturday. Don't miss plenty more recaps, plenty more good stuff coming from us next week, from myself, from co-host Isaac Shade, right here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, available wherever you get podcasts, also available on YouTube. Go hit that subscribe button if you have not done so yet. I want to thank all of you who have made Locked On College Basketball your first listen of the day. Enjoy the weekend, and peace out.